Free public transport has been good for Victorians in this cost of living crisis. However, as has been observed, the benefits have not been evenly distributed because not all Victorians have any access to public transport. For many of my constituents, any public transport at all would be good. Long before this latest cost of living crisis was brought on by fuel increases due to the war in Iran, people in the outer west and other growth areas were struggling to pay for transport. The lack of affordable, accessible, reliable public transport in these areas isolates residents from the type of facilities and amenities that most Melburnians take for granted, and indeed many of us can simply walk to. If you're living in a suburb where the nearest place to buy a carton of milk or a tube of toothpaste is 8 kilometres away, owning more than one car is not a luxury. It's a necessity, and certainly a big expense you could do without. So obviously they did not benefit from free public transport. And the government's discounted car registration is simply not equivalent to discounted public transport. The standard passenger vehicle registration for the outer metro region is $871 per year. So with a 20% discount, a driver will save about $174 in rego costs for the year. In two-car households, they'd save $348 per annum, and of course they're still paying for fuel. Whereas a household that can access public transport would have saved $228 per month during the month of free public transport, combined with the half-price fares in operation for the rest of the year, and we're talking about a saving of around $900. It's not complex, and it's not equitable, and it's not new. It is typical of the government's disregard and neglect of the western suburbs, and as Mr. Holland said, of the northern suburbs and of the far southeastern, where there are safe Labor seats. There tends just not to be the services. The recent announcement of a bus bonanza boosting services to better connect our suburbs sounded so very promising. But it only delivered some longer operating hours, that's good, and a few extra services. It was exactly the same piecemeal approach the government always takes to bus reform. They had the opportunity to do this in 24, and they rejected it on a cost basis. It's too expensive. But yet we can drop 30, 40, $50 billion into suburban rail link. And I will just note, Mr. Mulholland, that I think it's overly pessimistic of you to suggest that the delivery date for the suburban rail link for the northern and western suburbs is vague, because we have actually been told in the west that we can feel confident that Werribee will be hooked up by 2070. So, and to put it on a less sarcastic note, by way of example, buses were promised in the 2024-25 budget for a new Route 140 linking Mount Atkinson to Rockbank Station, and that is yet to even commence. Now, seriously, 18 months after the residents were told they're getting a new bus amongst a veritable blaze of press releases, how long does it take to operationalise a bus route? You know, I get it, like if it's a new station, sure, but a bus route, a few signs, a few seats, some buses, some drivers, I mean, they're all potentially logistical issues. But 18 months and there's still no sign of the bus. A decent bus network would be transformative for the outer Western communities and would cost around $100 million a year to operate. It's not much more than the cost of a month of free public transport for Melbourne, which was, I think, around $70 million. Or let's say $3 days worth of interest on the state debt. Certainly, improvements to our public transport system could be funded by any number of sources, including tax reform. And yes, it does need to be addressed. But then we also need to look pragmatically about the savings that can be made to other infrastructural needs, like roads and highways, if we actually have a working bus network. And so this is a complex agenda. We need to raise revenue, but we also need to recognise the real benefits, not just environmentally, but financially, that a decent public transport system can offer. I don't think cost is necessarily the barrier, because this has been a long-term problem and something that could have been addressed at any time during Labor's long tenure in government. I think it just ultimately comes down to a lack of priority and a lack of political will. We support this motion from the Greens before the House. Members might recall that Legalise Cannabis moved a similar motion calling for free public transport not so long ago. But of course, this was opposed by both the government and the opposition. So, in closing, Acting President, I would just like to commend the motion to the Chamber. It is thoughtful, it is appropriate, it is affordable, and it is ultimately a profound social good.
Mr.